happened to watch my previous video, you'll have seen that I finally finished the great Chinese classic Journey to the West. Finally, after years of thinking about reading it, been meaning to get around to it, but now I finally have finished off one of the great Chinese classics, which and not only that, but found it actually surprisingly fun to read. Now, it was long. I mean, there's no getting around that. It did take me forever to get through all four volumes. This is one volume out of four. But easy to read, pleasant to read, and I have now knocked off one of the four great Chinese classics. So I thought to myself, well, I've got one down. What about continuing to one of the others while I'm on a roll? Now, perhaps the sensible thing to do might be to take a break from Chinese classics for a while, read something lighter, read something different. But I know myself, if I don't strike while the iron is hot, if I don't just kind of keep following this thread of interest, then it's going to be another 20 years before I get around to it again. So now is the time I'm thinking about it. Now is the time to just plunge ahead. So my school library also has Three Kingdoms by the same publisher, Foreign Language Press, the Chinese classics. And I've been meaning to read Three Kingdoms for ages, so I thought, okay, let's give it a go. Let's see if I can do this. Journey to the West and Three Kingdoms are both, each. Should I say each or both? They're both part of what is regarded as the four great classics of Chinese literature. And there are four of them. These are only two of them, but these are definitely the two that I would see most frequently when I lived in Japan. In fact, I think I saw references to Three Kingdoms even more frequently when I lived in Japan. I'm not sure if this would still be true now. I mean, keep in mind I was in Japan 20 years ago, so all my information might be 20 years out of date. But when I was in Japan, I would see this everywhere. It would be there was all kinds of comic book adaptations of this in Japan, which you would just see everywhere. They would be in the convenience stores. There were video game adaptations of it. It seemed like this, even though it was a Chinese classic, it wasn't a Japanese classic, but this Chinese classic was very popular in Japanese media, and it was one of the first realizations I had of China being the basis of the literary canon for all of Asia, just like Greece and Rome are the literary canon for all of the Western world. And in fact, they say on the back here, where is it? The Three Kingdoms continues to be read throughout China as well as in Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. Well, I've not lived in Korea. Definitely very popular in Japan. I'm not sure how many people are actually reading the novel, but they're exposed to it through video games and comic books. And in Vietnam, it doesn't strike me as quite as popular as it was in Japan. But my Vietnamese students definitely know about it. I'm not sure how many of them are actually reading it. But yeah, Three Kingdoms. Actually, I know surprisingly little about this book. But hopefully by the time I get to the end of it, I'll have learned something. But it's a historical novel mixing in history with fiction about a period in Chinese history when China had been a unified state, and then it dissolved into three warring kingdoms. I was just reading the introduction to this here, and I was struck that this is probably like the Chinese version of Game of Thrones. I don't know. I hate to be that guy who compares everything to Game of Thrones, but here we are. Um, it's a kingdom that starts out as one, just like in Game of Thrones, and then there's an uprising, and then what happens? So there's an uprising, and then they unite to defeat that uprising, and then it looks like it splits into a bunch of warring generals and three different kingdoms. The novel offers a startling and unsparing view of how power is wielded, how diplomacy is conducted, how wars are planned and thought. I mean, it kind of sounds like Game of Thrones, right? Or the real history that the Game of Thrones author might have been inspired by. Okay, sorry, that's the last time I'll mention Game of Thrones in this video. Um, but yeah, that seems to be the basic plot of it. I think this version here is Three Kingdoms, and I guess I'll be referring to it as Three Kingdoms because I think you've got to go with the title of the book that you're holding in your hand. But it's equally, if not more often, known as Romance of the Three Kingdoms. When I was first in Japan and I was encountering this in the comic book stores, I would see it translated as Romance of the Three Kingdoms. But yeah, either way, Three Kingdoms or Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Now, we'll see how this goes. I'm a little bit worried I may have bitten off something that's a little bit over my head here, if you'll permit me to mix my metaphors. There's a lot of history in here. And I know nothing about Chinese history, so we'll see if I'm able to keep up. I mean, right from the first page, there's like 4 notes, and this is one of those books that has extensive notes in the back, so I've got a separate bookmark just from the notes. And then the notes are talking about all the history that everything is referring to. And look at this. Look at this. We're 2 pages in, 3 pages in, and already we're like 11 footnotes to check in those first 3 pages, all about because Journey to the West, by contrast, had almost no notes in here, and I think the author could have done more notes if he wanted to explain all the references to something, but it was just a fantasy story, and this translator was content. Sorry, did I say author earlier? I mean the translator could have had more notes, not the author. But anyways, it was a fantasy story, and the translator was content to let it stand as a fantasy story with no notes. Here, I may have to spend. There's also one of the things that's supposedly intimidating about this book is like a cast of thousands. But all that being said, sometimes you just have to take the plunge. And it may be that I have to spend a lot of time on Wikipedia kind of looking up who all these people are. And it may be that I have to read sections of this book twice over just to get all the characters straight. I mean, I when I was reading War and Peace many years ago, I remember I reread the first 300 pages just so I could get straight who all the families were and who all the characters were. And maybe I'll do that with this book. Read the first 300 pages twice or something. Or it may be that the first time I read through this book, it's largely confusing, but then I'll come back and reread it in a couple years. I don't know if that's realistic, but that's it's one of the things I realize as I get older is you don't wait for perfect time to read the classics. You just plunge right in, and if you're not quite ready for it, then you reread the classics a little bit later. Classic books are meant to be read and reread anyways. course, some classic books are shorter. I forget how many pages this is in all. This is just volume 1 of 4, so 535. So we're probably looking at about 2,000 pages. But I don't know if you can tell this on camera. Is this going to show up? You can see actually that the print is actually bigger than the Journey to the West. So even though they're both Chinese classics in 4 volumes, this one has tiny print and this one has normal size print. So maybe that element of it will be a faster read. Oh, and I was mentioning in Journey to the West about how all the poetry in that slowed me down. Doesn't look like there's nearly as much poetry in here, so maybe that will be a quicker read. I don't know. We'll see what I'm getting into here. But sorry, to briefly come back around to what I was talking about earlier. This book, or comic book adaptations of it, were very popular in Japan. Video game adaptations of it. I was always very curious about it when I was in Japan because, I'm the kind of person who is curious about big, epic stories. Sometimes intimidated by them, but curious about them. At one point, I did actually buy one of the comic books, and I thought I've mentioned in previous videos how after I learned some Japanese, I was trying to read Japanese comic books to practice my Japanese, but the level of the words in that comic book were much different than the normal everyday words because it was all history words, so I wasn't able to make much heads or tails of it. I did certainly get the impression, though, that it was kind of like the Chinese Iliad in the sense that it was just this epic war story. Now, maybe that's selling this book short because it looks like it's much more complex than the Iliad. But yeah, but where is it? I think somewhere here in the oh yeah, here it is. There's a comparison to the Iliad right here on the back cover. As important for Chinese culture as the Homeric epics have been for the West. So there you go, a comparison to the Iliad right there. Yeah. We'll see how this goes. So I will, I think I'll do the same thing I did with Journey to the West. I'll do mini reviews once I finish each volume, and then a big review at the end. I did mention in Journey to the West that in volume 4 there were pages missing from this publisher. Hopefully we don't have that problem here in the Three Kingdoms, although I guess I'm taking my chances now, aren't I? But I have noticed actually one thing already. The epigraph, which is referred to in the notes here, does not actually show up in the text. So there's the introduction by the publisher, or the translator perhaps. And then there's chapter 1, but the epigraph doesn't show up anywhere. So just because I'm a stickler for these things, I looked it up online. I found a copy on Internet Archive in English, and I did find the epigraph that this is referring to. But it looks like they just forgot to include the epigraph. The publishers did, even though they included the notes to the epigraph. But I did track that down online. So if I have any other problems like that, I guess I'll be tracking stuff down online. And yeah, I think that's all I want to say for now.